Class, welcome back to film Scarface. The year is 1932. Okay, the director is Howard Hawks. That's the same director that made The Big Sleep, which you watched last week. What are we talking about? We're talking about politics. That's what we're talking about. We're going to use Hollywood as a little viewfinder to look at American society and vice versa. So what's going on in the 30s? Well, what's going on is a thing called the Motion Picture Production Code, also called Hayes Law. And this is a major, major shaping factor on American cinema for many years to come. It actually still is in a lot of ways. All right, let's go back to the basics. If we jump to the third slide briefly, just these top 3 points. What's going on in America in the 20s? Here's some of the things that are going on. October 1929, Wall Street crashes, and we start the Great Depression. That's 29. 1920, alcohol is prohibited. They do a constitutional amendment, no booze in America. That lasts for 13 years. What does that do? What does that generate? Well, it generates an enormous amount of illegal alcohol trade. And who does it? Well, gangsters do it. That's Al Capone, all the gangsters that were happening, all those famous stories about gangsters in the 30s and 20s. So that comes to a crescendo, in 1929 in Chicago. There are the St. Valentine's Day massacre. And this is a murder of 5 or 6 men who were associated with one gang, murdered by a different gang. And while there was a ton of killing going on back then, this particular story really shocked America. It was like a national story. And so that's kind of like the backdrop to what's going on back in the 20s. It's a very complicated time. If you think about it, you have very conservative forces taking hold, like, no alcohol in the whole country. But simultaneously, if you look at what people are doing, you get the speakeasies and all this illegal activity. So it's simultaneously very liberal and very, very conservative, and it's sort of a big battle going on. Now, what's Hollywood doing at this time? It's doing what it's always done. It's trying to make money. It's trying to grow. How does it do it? It sells stories with sex and violence and controversy, right? And images no one's ever seen before. So what's happening for Hollywood is this. 1915, there's a Supreme Court case, and the Supreme Court says, hey, guess what? Film, you are not an art form. You are commerce only. Thus, you are not protected by the First Amendment, freedom of speech. Therefore, you can be censored. That's 1915. So through the 20s, in cities and in states, boards are formed. There are censorship boards. And those boards, before any film gets shown in that city or in that state, the board can say, well, we don't like this theme, we don't like this scene, and they can refuse the screening of that film in that place. Now, it takes a long time, but the numbers of those censorship boards grow and grow and grow, and they start to coordinate. Throughout the 20s, that sort of movement is growing and strengthening, right? The censorship movement, but it's happening at more local levels. Hollywood kind of tries to battle it, but it's hard because Hollywood is not one thing, it's many things put together in all the studios. By the late 20s, those censorship boards are becoming more and more powerful, better coordinated, and they're forming these big lists of no-nos, like rules, the things that films shouldn't do. So the film industry gets smart. Now, the film industry formed a group. It's now called the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America. And this was basically an office to coordinate the major studios. And they got together and they said, okay, we got to do something. We have to self-regulate before the feds get involved. We don't want the federal government to regulate us. It's already bad enough. And they took one of the leaders from that movement, from that censorship movement, and they co-opted him. They brought him in and said, okay, you're known as and thought of as like clean. You have a good reputation. Much of this, by the way, was associated with religious movements. And you're going to be in charge of this office. And we're going to form rules and we're going to self-regulate. It took a while for it to form, but the conversation got stronger in the early 30s, and by 1934 the system had become completely bureaucratic. There was a full system with a certification process, and it started in 1934. 1934, you can make a film, and then it had to go to this office, and it couldn't be shown. Hollywood wouldn't even release it until it got through that office, and you literally got a certificate, right? So that's how firm it got by 34. But it was a ramping process that took a decade plus to fully come to fruition. Now, the product of it was that Hollywood started to follow a bunch of rules that it had sort of self-imposed. And those rules are really interesting. If you look at the second slide, you'll see, this is not all of them, but these are some examples. You cannot use words like God, Lord, or Jesus. It's considered a profanity. No nudity, no illegal traffic in drugs, no inference of sexual perversion. That's a sly way of saying nothing that suggests homosexuality, or who God only knows what else. White slavery. I mean, some of these are hard to even say out loud. You can't show sexual relationships between black and white race. It's just, this stuff is shameful. But this is what they did. So the code comes into full enforcement in 1934. What was the product? Well, before we get to the product, actually, let's talk about the full lifestyle, the cycle of this thing. Through the 20s, the censorship thing is happening, but it's happening at local levels. 1934, Hollywood completely takes over the process. And it is no longer really necessary for the cities and states to have their censorship boards, but they still exist. So we get all the way through the 30s, we get into the 40s. There are definitely some adjustments to the system, but for the most part, it's very strong at that time. We get into the 50s and something happens, and it's the Supreme Court reverses the earlier case that said that film was not an art form. And they said, yes, film is an art form, and it does deserve First Amendment protection, freedom of speech. Therefore, it is no longer legal to censor. It means that Hollywood has started to censor itself willingly, but it means that all those city and state censorship boards are no longer legal and couldn't exist anyway. But they're not really functioning anyway, but now there's officially no reason to have them. They're illegal. But Hollywood keeps the rules because Hollywood wants to keep, one, a clean reputation, and two, more importantly, they want to make sure that Wall Street continues to invest in them. It's about money. So we go through the 50s, and these rules are still strongly in place, but they start to corrode a little bit, and it's happening. There's 2 points of competition. The first is television. Television really gets going right after World War II. In the 50s, it's just banging, right? TV is like the best thing that ever happened in the 50s. And the movies start to suffer because why would you go to a movie theater if you can stay home? The industry realizes they need to offer something different that can't be done on TV. And one of the things that movies can do is sex appeal and violence, because you can't do that on television as easily. So this is a problem. And also a very big problem is that because Hollywood is self-imposing these rules, this isn't coming from the government, it means that other people who aren't in Hollywood can make a movie any way they want, in particular Europe. So German film or French film or Italian film, they can tell the story however they choose. And because of the lawsuit we talked about last week, that antitrust suit, Hollywood couldn't control the theaters, and it meant that the theaters could show foreign films. So all of a sudden you got foreign films coming in, and they're showing all this stuff that Hollywood can't. So those two forces start to change the motion picture production code. By the late 1960s, it's untenable. It no longer functions at all. It's been heavily eroded. And the MPAA revises the whole system and develops what we know now, which is the R, PG, and G system. It's still self-regulation. This does not come from the government. That is Hollywood doing that. It's their system to sort of keep the government off their back. Later on in the 1980s, we get PG-13. They added that one in later. Okay, now, this film is the original Scarface. The one made in 1983 that was written by Oliver Stone. This is what it's based on, sort of. And what I want you to pay attention to when you watch the film, in particular, the acting style. It's amazing it's the same director. It's such a different kind of movie. Very different acting style. Very different themes. And the ending is in a courtroom. Okay, so this film came out before the certification process, right? So it meant that the code existed, but it wasn't being rigorously enforced yet, but they knew the rules. So the end of the film is custom made for these rules. And you'll see that it's a judge in a courtroom who gets the final word. The reason for that is because the code, or the Hays Office, puts special emphasis on respect for the law, and they look down on sexuality. So those were the 2 things they were most concerned about. So look for that scene at the end of the film. Okay, I want to show you one more thing before we finish this up. So for regular folks, I mean, it's you're like, whatever, yeah, there's this weird system, and Hollywood has all these self-imposed rules. But what is the product of it? Well, if you look at films from the 40s, films like the one we watched last week in particular, The Big Sleep, you see strange scenes that for contemporary audiences are very confusing. The example from last week is when the younger sister is found in the house and she's drunk, she's got the robe on, there's the camera. Because of this rule system, Hollywood could not show, Howard Hawks, same director, could not show a more sort of clear, explicit scene. Kids growing up in the 50s, right? These are the kinds of scenes they saw. Now, watch this scene. I'm going to show you. This is from a Hitchcock film called Notorious. And you'll see that it's a makeout scene between the two leads. One of the rules of thumb for directors back then was no kiss should last longer than 3 seconds. So what directors would do is they direct the actors like kiss, stop, kiss, stop, kiss, stop, kiss, stop, instead of making out continuously, right? And so the product is this really weird depiction of affection and love and sexuality that must have totally confused kids in the 50s and 60s. Anyway, take a look at this scene. Watch this. Go for it.
It's nice out here. Let's not go out for dinner. Let's stay here.
We have to eat.
What you need here, I'll cook.
I thought you didn't like to cook.
No, I don't like to cook. But I have a chicken in the icebox, and you're eating it.
What about all the washing up afterwards?
We'll eat it with our fingers.
Don't we need any plates?
Yes. One for you and one for me.
Do you mind if I had dinner with you tonight?
I'd be delighted. Where are you going?
Well, if you're going to stay in, I have to telephone the hotel, see if there are any messages.
You have to.
I have to.
This is a very strange love affair.
Why?
Maybe the fact that you don't love me.
Hello? Palace Hotel? Fanning Place? It's T.R. Devlin. Are there any messages for me? When I don't love you, I'll let you know.
You haven't said anything.
Actions speak louder than words. There is? Good. Read it to me, please. Prescott wants me over right away.
Did he say what about it?
No,
Maybe it's our assignment.
probably. Do you want me to bring anything back with me?
Yes. What about a nice bottle of wine to celebrate?
What time should I come back?
7 o'clock.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Oh, yes, yes. That must have been confusing if you were a kid in 1958, right? Okay, so we have a post-assessment quiz test, called whatever you want. It's 5 questions. 3 of the questions are from this material, these notes, this lecture. 2 of the questions are review from last week, specifically depth of field. You're going to have 2 questions. You'll look at an image. You'll need to be able to say if it's shallow depth of field or deep depth of field. If you don't remember that stuff, please look at your notes from last week. Take a few minutes, get it burnt in. It's just some practice, okay? Enjoy the film. I'll see you guys next week.